Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of Developing the Trust with me, Tim Warneford, and my special guest today, Andrew Dutton. Good morning.
Good morning, Tim. Good to see you.
And yourself. I wouldn't like to think how many years we've been on the same platform and discussing very similar subjects, but it's great to finally have you down here in sunny Brighton.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
More than welcome. It's a long overdue invitation. So obviously, Andrew, given where we are at the moment in late March of 2026, it would be the obvious place to start would be to discuss the latest DfE's Education Estates 10-year strategy, which was published less than a month ago. And so ideally, I want to kind of maybe for us to pick that apart and see the good, the bad, and hopefully not too much ugliness, but for us to explore what we think the strategy is and what we know at the moment. So what were your initial feelings or thoughts on the strategy?
Well, first of all, we really welcome the strategy. It's great to see everything in one place. It's a coherent reflection on actually what the DfE have been looking to do for a number of years, and we've been supporting some of that. And it's really good to have all of that now as a single focus, and actually that focus on strategic management of the estate. We could accuse many trusts, I suppose, of having just been dealing with the here and now and keeping schools open, and who could blame them when there's been a real challenge of capability, a challenge of resource, not having in place the ability to manage their estates strategically. Now, the document doesn't necessarily change that overnight, but it's the right direction of travel as far as we're concerned. So really welcome it.
Yeah, I agree. It feels it was overdue. It feels that there is almost like very often in terms of motivation, there is a combination of carrot and stick in there, isn't there? Effectively, we've had gems. There has been cascaded best practice down, and I suppose you and I see on a day-to-day basis how many trusts are able to absorb and apply that, and those that aren't. I suppose my question is, do you believe that what will come out from this latest strategy will be a clearer focus of minds, that they understand they are going to have to do it, and there will be penalties if you don't?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that clearer focus. Let's think back to how funding has been allocated over the last decade, 15 years. It's been that focus on condition. It's been dealing with the worst condition. And then if you take that a step further, you start thinking, well, actually, this is funding of those that have not necessarily maintained their assets well. So by virtue, those that have not necessarily spent and invested and managed their estate strategically are those that have got the funding. Now, this is a subtle change, really, in terms of actually manage your estates strategically, have an estate strategy, have a that plays out the estate vision, that links to the education vision, have the right level of asset management plan information and data in place that informs data-led decision making, that makes sure that actually all funding is being invested in the right way and going to the right things, and actually being quite productively invested. So that's a subtle change, really, in terms of how funding is going to be allocated, because the intent seems to be there, that those that have all of that proactive approach to data in place and asset management planning that sits within the strategy are going to be rewarded in that sense.
Yeah, I obviously take your point. 10 years of SIF, there was definitely evidence that those schools that whose condition was so poor, if you work on the premise of need being the number one driver, the current need, the snapshot that the survey feeds back, that they will be more likely to receive funding than those who perhaps had invested and maintained their asset to a far better degree, and therefore were unable to produce the same sorts of immediate priority. I take that point. And I think that in theory, the allocation of future funding based on empirical data that is collected, that will inform the strategy and the asset management plan, all in theory sound very, very, very sound, very good practice.
Yeah.
I think because we don't live in an ideal world, we live in an imperfect world with an imperfect system. We have to question, and you've already mentioned that that those trusts who do have the wherewithal, who do have the resources, and who will have already be en route to level 3, if not level 4, they will be fairly rewarded. I guess you and I have to also accept that not everyone is in the same position. And I guess here we're talking about standalone and small MATs. How are they going to best be able to make those necessary investments to be able to attract the allocation?
Well, I think my answer to that question is with great difficulty. If you've got a very small trust or a single academy trust, you haven't got the capacity, the scale, to be able to have all of that bandwidth to focus on the estate. It's probably one person with a multitude of roles and responsibilities, and therefore it's going to be very difficult to do all of the things that the estate strategy talks about. And we know that from some of the work we've been involved with the DfE on in terms of the capital advisor program. We know that smaller trusts struggle. It's not lack of intent, to be clear. We've talked to many trusts about GEMS, and they want to do these things, but it's just not been able to get to them because of other competing responsibilities around curriculum delivery, around health and safety, all manner of things in terms of running a school or a trust. So none of that changes actually just by publishing the strategy. That is still a challenge, and the challenge remains. I suspect that the longer term view is that we may start to see less of the smaller MATs in time, and perhaps more amalgamation, more sharing of resources, so that MATs can create the scale, capacity, and capability, access to capability that the larger trusts have in place now, and are doing and delivering some of this intent already.
Obviously, from my perspective, again, the other thing I really enjoy working with Andrew is that I'm always on the ground dealing with the standalones, with the smaller MATs, and Andrew's very often at a higher level with the DfE and effectively, looking down on how that policy will be implicated. I'm always here to protect and voice those concerns of the smaller trusts. And obviously, thus far, regardless of whichever administration has been in power, however they have tried to drive the original numbers of 1,000 a year of trusts transferring, there is a limited appetite for primary schools. Okay, primary schools do not ideally want to fit into a subservient role in a pyramid under secondary schools, and again, whilst I understand the attraction of one system, you and I spent our entire careers around schools, and one size does not fit all. And for me, if a school, if a standalone school or a small trust is able to navigate and weather those financial storms, etc., I feel incumbent upon myself to defend those so that they're not forced into a trust that they don't want to be a part of. Because all schools seek to be autonomous. They're always really proud, aren't they, of all of their successes. So for me, it feels like a bit of a sledgehammer here. Admittedly, a slow. I'm going to mix some Alan Partridge metaphors here in a minute, so I'm going to be really careful here. But the idea of those smaller trusts being performance managed out, I feel a little bit uncomfortable with, if I'm honest. But the reality is, if you have set these requirements, and if you're effectively saying you will only receive funding allocation if you are able to produce this, then they are going to be in a very difficult corner, aren't they?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the things you're saying. I was in a school just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it was the day the strategy was published, and it was a successful primary school, but they were quite opposed actually to academisation. It was a maintained school under local authority control, and it worked for them at the time. I guess in my mind the challenge we've got is, particularly in the maintained sector, local authorities have not got the support capacity that they once had for the schools estate. So even schools in that position now, it's kind of a worse position than they once were in, and to me, it kind of from an estate's point of view. I recognise that there are other challenges here, but from an estate's point of view, it does seem that they need an element of scale in terms of support around them. That affects dioceses as well, doesn't it? In
Absolutely.
Terms of the voluntary aided sector, and it's quite interesting. Some well-established diocese organisations that we've worked with over decades still have quite a large number of schools remaining in their voluntary aided position, and they've had good support from those diocese organisations. Really, it works like a trust ought to work.
Yeah.
But I think that as those organisations are finding that there's less schools, or as schools have academised for whatever reason, that's become challenging for them to maintain that level of service that they once did. So I do think that the maintained schools haven't got it as good as perhaps they once had from an estate support point of view, and being part of a trust may help them have that scale and capacity to be able to focus on their estates, but recognise all the things, and I understand the whole principle of actually that's not what everybody wants,
So the other thing, when we look at the strategy, the end point is we do not want to have complete school rebuilding programme numbers that we've got, and before that we don't necessarily want the condition of fabric and key components to fall into what we would describe as capital projects. The idea is to move from the usual costly reactive into a preventative plan maintenance regime. Okay, and it would appear that the very prescriptive DfE condition survey template, which is now being rolled out, is going to work towards that. Again, up until now, when I'm procuring condition surveys on behalf of my clients, I always start with what's the output, because there's no point of sending in chartered surveyors to collect data that you're never going to use, because they're going to be there longer. You're going to be paying a higher fee. What do you actually want from the output? And then we'll work back. Very rarely have I had them. We're preparing for a PPM on this. Very rarely. Yeah. Okay. However, that would look to be the direction of travel. And only this week, I've had to design an ITT on behalf of a client, basically saying to the consultants that will be bidding for those 10 condition surveys, you're going to have to use the DfE one now, because that's the one they're going to be required going forward for the data capture, for all of the things that we've just talked about, and the sharing back with the DfE. I suppose, again, I've got a question. To be able to put in place a PPM, to be able to get the value out of that, you actually need more than your DFC to start in terms of how you're going to invest there. And so, again, it feels that it will benefit those larger trusts, but what impact is this going to have on the smaller trusts that don't even know how to run a PPM?
Yeah. Can I maybe just go back to the first part of your question, then we maybe come to the trusts and managing condition. You mentioned about the school rebuild programme and the direction of travel to need less rebuilding. Now, the rebuild programme is only a very, very small percentage of the overall school estate. So actually, in terms of being equitable, it's necessary, isn't it, to think about what is delivered through the school rebuild programme and think, well, actually, what are the synergies that need to be applied to the whole estate, and that picks up around good quality condition, but also inclusion and sustainability, and the strategy draws on those things actually, and trying to take some of the good things and the lessons from how schools are now built and some of the good practice that we've got in place, and trying to deploy that through the education estate strategy. And there's a couple of things called out. There was the retrofit and renew programme. There was the regenerative schools. So there's a couple of things there that the DfE are trying to focus on, which we really welcome actually, and just trying to bring that common theme around not just delivery of new school accommodation, but keeping on top of and maintaining the existing, trying to keep those in tandem actually, and rather than waiting for condition to deteriorate, actually deliver a school's estate that is equitable across the board. So it shouldn't really matter, should it, whether a family are sending children to a school that was built 30 years ago or a school that was built 2 years ago. They should be able to get within measure the same level of experience, and I think that's the direction of travel, and what we're seeing through this strategy is that that intent to seek to deliver that. Now we'll come back to the funding piece, because that's where you made the point that actually how do you allocate condition funding to deal with backlog and to move the existing estate forward, and we both know that there's some trusts that have been able to do that, and they've got through some of their backlog maintenance, and now they're looking at enhancing their accommodation. They're touching on other things in the strategy around suitably sized and the suitability focus of the estate, and sustainability as well. These are all things that some trusts have got the luxury perhaps now of being able to look at after having spent 5-10 years on dealing with their roofs, dealing with their heating, and dealing with their refenestration and things that were really necessary, but now they've managed to get the estate through that. There's some that are really struggling to even get to that point, and I guess we come back to where we were talking about earlier, the challenge of the different structures really of very small trusts and the larger trusts. Now, if you've got a trust of a certain size, and I'm not going to suggest what the optimum size of trust is, but if you've got a trust of a certain size that has a couple of million of school condition allocation every year, they've got that flexibility if they are following a strategic approach to deliver a condition programme, and dealing with some of the other things now that maintains that to a reasonable standard. If you've got, I think we were talking separately about access to £50,000 condition funding, that's difficult, and difficult to move forward. So I think that kind of difference in structure is the real challenge at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward.
Exactly. I think in terms of a level playing field, those trusts that were once eligible for SIF, that were once afforded, 2 capital project bids a year for several hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not north of £1 million, that now equates to the whole allocation for a client that I have of around 20 schools, and it, as you just said, it equates to about £50,000 a school. That's a very small award in terms of a capital project, and therefore the fear is that if the model is to be effectively universal formulaic funding, as those schools that were once eligible for SIF will now be in receipt of SCA, they will not have sufficient funds upon which to be able to build very much of a PPM, let alone any capital works.
And I think we've known trusts, haven't we, that will have had this strategy where they keep the numbers of a certain size,
Below 3,000,
maximise their SIF,
absolutely,
and then move.
Yep.
And they saw the benefit of moving, actually,
absolutely.
because once you've dealt with some of the big hitting projects, because, by the way, you wouldn't have got some of the other things they want to do under SIF, because they wouldn't have had the condition that was poor enough. And they've moved into SCA, and they've had a good platform to move forward on. So that's probably been the strategy of quite a number of trusts up and down.
I totally agree, and SCA is ideal for maintenance.
Yeah,
I agree, but as we know, we're working against a backlog to get to that place, and that's going to be very difficult.
And I guess that comes back round to the intent behind the strategy of enhancing data. So the DfE have done quite a good job of getting a statewide consistent condition data that has enabled them to go into Treasury, and that's enabled them to secure funding around school rebuild school rebuild programme, school condition allocation, and SIF. Actually, going forward, data's only going to enhance, whether it's building on the quality of data that the department have got, whether it's trust supplementing that data with their own data, as the strategy seems to be aligned, suggesting now, particularly through the digital portal, and being able to use data in a clever way through AI and whatever. Going forward, I think that's going to be quite exciting, actually, in terms of seeing the best of all the data sets come together to be able to provide an informed picture, and keeping that real and live will only help the DfE further in terms of bids to Treasury.
Oh, for sure.
And that's probably what you and I are looking for, is that increased level of funding that isn't necessarily going to the rebuild programme, which we saw that expand last year, and we welcome that. But to see more flow into the existing estate is what we're looking for, and I think data will help.
I agree. I have been a critic of CDC from day one. I've never been happy with the way it's collected, and I've never been happy that it's been accurate enough. And I think that has undoubtedly meant that when DfE have gone to Treasury, they haven't gone there with the right figures. Whereas I actually think now, from collecting from the bottom up, and to be fair to the DfE in terms of the granular detail that they now want from those surveys, I think they will be afforded a much more accurate picture, i.e. of condition, and subject to, unfortunately, as you and I know, condition surveys, the schedule of rates doesn't include prelims, doesn't include builders' works, doesn't include contingencies. That is 30 or 40% out every time before you've gone to market. I think that our hope is exactly as you've just said, that they will have more accurate cost and condition data to be able to knock on Treasury doors, and for the funding not to go to school rebuilding programme. As you said, 3.5% is what is the 768 schools. That's all it represents of 22,000 of our state, and yet it almost has the same amount of funding that's afforded to SIF and SEA together. That for me is not equitable. That's not fair.
I mean, just putting your point on CDC, I thought this might come up. The CDC. I do think it's definitely moved the estate forward, because before it there was property data surveys, which was an attempt to kind of, I suppose, start this process of a national picture of the estate, which really we didn't have before. So actually, it's moved something forward. It would never have been possible to deliver a granular condition survey that you and I would kind of commission across the whole estate in the time and with the budget actually that they've had. So it has provided that national picture, which has informed some of the Treasury allocation. So I think it's really moved us forward, and we're into that next phase now, aren't we? So actually to bring that together with locally collected information, to continually normalise data, I think that's quite an exciting thing. I agree. It's
definitely a step in the right direction.
So I do think it's had its benefit, CDC, in that sense, and it's informed some of the school rebuild programme allocations as well. So in terms of moving forward, though, It's about trying to continually build that picture.
What other interesting elements did you take from the strategy? What other things are you and Arcadis focusing on?
So there's some really interesting references to community links. We've seen this coming out over the last couple of years, actually, in terms of the school being the hub of the community, and the effective use of schools, bringing community cohesion together through the school. So that is really interesting, and I think we're quite keen to see how that develops, actually. In terms of community use, you've got the flexibility that is required going forward, and actually not seen as an asset that's just used for part of the time. It's quite interesting when you start touching on sustainability and energy use challenges. You often find that when the schools are closed in the summer and closed evenings and weekends, there's a big cost to that from an energy point of view. Schools that have got renewables in place often generate the most energy when they're closed. So there's another factor that's quite interesting. So actually looking for those opportunities going forward, I think is going to be really interesting.
So I equally, and finally, I am massively encouraged, and obviously it's something we've been lobbying for years, that government accept finite resources. It does look like the Academy's Trust Handbook will be loosened. It does look like we are going to be allowing for private investment, etc. And that is another exciting option. The retrofit and renewal, they talk about blended funding there. Mm-hmm. So I think that schools, obviously subject with public procurement 2023, Academy's Trust Handbook, etc., it does look like they will be able to borrow to save, I think is the safe phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, and with you, I'm watching that and quite interested to see how that develops, because the cost of these interventions is going to need that kind of level of blended funding, and actually to move forward, some of the interventions will generate savings in the long run, which only helps with a strategic estate plan, doesn't it? In terms of being able to maintain something that's costing less to run. So really interested about that. I think the other point, I was in a school recently, which their PAN had been reduced by half. Actually, it was a 2-form entry primary school, or built as a 2-form entry primary school. It was now a 1-form entry primary school. So they were using the space that they had available to support lots of community links, and their community was very diverse. It was in an area of the country where there was a lot of mobility, and families moving in, moving out, and it was quite interesting to see how they were needing to use and provide actually services for that community to integrate and actually provide an inclusive, or contribute towards an inclusive community through the school. The school was a hub to that. So they were using some of their space to support that. Because of some of their challenge, they had a lot of SEND challenge at the school, and they were able to use their space to support SEND cases as well. So maybe change that to SEND needs. So that is quite interesting, and it kind of represents a wider demographic change, doesn't it, in terms of generally, and I know there's pockets across the country, but generally a fall in mainstream places, but an increase in special educational needs places. The existing estate provides capacity to be able to provide some of those spaces, whether it be through ARPs or whether it be providing SEND units attached to existing mainstream schools. There's opportunities around that, and we're starting to see quite a lot of that, particularly in some of the hotspot areas, to see that kind of repurposing come through. And making use of the existing estate is a good way. It's an effective, it's a productive way, isn't it, to provide for those needs. So I think that that is an interesting point to be watching at the moment.
I agree. There's lots of good material to take from the strategy. And I've still got a few reservations about, as I say, the smaller trusts and how they are going to be able to address their backlog condition needs, especially in terms of capital projects. One of the things that CIF did provide was a clear generic output from a design perspective. So if you were putting a new roof system on, it would need to have 25 years warranty, etc. Whereas in the SCA space, there is not the same level of scrutiny. Effectively, they could put single ply in there if they so chose, and yet we're supposed to be moving towards, life cycle. We're supposed to be moving towards how we get the best value from the type of system that we put in there. And whilst CIF has always been the whipping boy, there is this. I'm not sure that the SCA fund has had the same level of scrutiny.
Totally agree with you. I think that there's challenges around SCA. In terms of it all depends on how strategic and proactive the responsible body has been in terms of delivering it, and not all will have delivered it in a way that is dealing with the most urgent priorities first. And actually, in the absence of an estate strategy across a trust or a group of schools, it's very difficult to set those priorities in the right way. And you might have trusts that are great at procuring work and deciding, right, we'll do a roofing programme this year, and that being the right thing to do from a priority point of view in terms of preventing further deterioration of the estate. But actually, what it doesn't necessarily deal with is the pupil numbers issue. And from a strategic point of view, are they improving the roofs of the schools with surplus place, and actually wings should be closed down or mothballed?
Exactly,
so there's a whole wider piece there around, has SCA been spent in a way that is strategic, and that's what the estate strategy from a DfE point of view is encouraging going forward, and actively encouraging through, as you mentioned, that being the way of rewarding. So I think that has been a challenge. I think it will start to be give that level of scrutiny, and will it get up to the same level as SIF? Probably not quite, but actually it gives the tools for responsible bodies to be managing their estates a bit more strategically, and delivering programmes that are investing in the most important elements.
So just as a takeaway, what are you advising? You'll have CFOs, COOs of trusts coming to you, Andrew, now and saying, okay, we've just had a chance to digest the strategy. What is your advice to them in terms of direction of travel? What are you advising them to put in place?
I would say make it your own. So if you haven't got a specific trust, estate vision and estate strategy written down, that would be your first port of call. So I'd say do that. I would then say make sure you've got all of the supporting data that is in place and recommended by this strategy in terms of condition data, suitability data, sufficiency data, sustainability data, everything that comes together in a way that informs a credible asset management plan. I would say invest in that. Too many trusts you hear day in, day out are focused on what's right in front of them, and it's dealing with the leaky roofs now, and that's right, and I understand that, but actually just take that step back to put the strategy in place, the plan in place, that enables them to move forward those condition interventions and wider interventions in a strategic way, because it avoids abortive investment essentially. So I would say really bite the bullet and get that estate strategy in place. There are ways of funding it. Some trusts would say, well, we haven't got the funding to do it, but you can use your condition allocation for surveys, and that is the right thing to do to inform the right scope of works and the right prioritisation of work. So that would be my advice: is don't delay. and move forward your own estate strategy that really talks to your local needs.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not a question of can I afford to, it's a question of can I afford not to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Thanks for your time. Brilliant. Thank you.